April 10th, 2001, it's just after 8:30 in the morning, Scottsdale, Arizona, a Tuesday. 2223 North 74th Place sits at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in South Scottsdale. It's a single-story brick ranch, neat yard, usually 2 cars in the driveway. Right now, the house is dark. The curtains are drawn, and there's a reason for that. Somewhere near the furnace, a candle's burning. It's been burning for hours. And the gas line that feeds that furnace, it's been pulled loose. On purpose. Natural gas has been filling that house all night. It's settling silently into every corner, and 3 people are inside. A 38-year-old mother, 12-year-old daughter, and a 10-year-old son. They're in their beds, and they're not asleep. They're dead. The candle keeps burning, and finally it finds the gas. The blast hits the neighborhood like a bomb. Brick walls crack, windows blow out half a mile away, flames climb 20 feet high, neighbors run into the streets thinking a plane went down. Some grab garden hoses, trying to keep the fire off their own homes till the trucks get there. Firefighters arrive and go to work, their smaller explosions still popping off inside the house while they do, and when they finally get there, they find them, a woman and 2 children in their beds. But the injuries the firefighters are looking at, they didn't come from any fire, they're looking at bullet wounds. Now what's missing from this picture? The father's gone. The mother's Toyota 4Runner's gone. The family dog is gone. There's no note, no call, no sign of forced entry, no sign of anybody else at all. 10 days later, that 4Runner turns up 100 miles away. It's deep in the Tonto National Forest. It's been wiped clean. The dog's right there beside it, alive, guarding an empty car. The man's nowhere to be found, so the FBI puts him on the 10 most wanted list. He sits there for the better part of 20 years. Hundreds of sightings, not one confirmed. And in 2021, the Bureau quietly takes him off. 2 decades of looking, and it turned up nothing. So which is it? Did he walk into those woods and end it? Or did he walk back out, build a new life, and disappear? That's the question nobody's been able to answer for 25 years. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. This is the story of Robert Fisher, the man who vanished. Stay with me. So who's the father? The one that's not in that house. His name's Robert William Fisher. Most folks call him Bob. And here's the thing about Bob Fisher, depending on who you ask, he was either one of the kindest men they ever knew or somebody that they'll never be able to explain. Let's start with the kindness, because it was real. There's a woman named Ashley, a respiratory therapist who started working alongside Robert back in the 90s, and she was one of his closest friends. For 23 years, she said nothing about him to anybody. And then she sat down and gave her very first interview to the Missing in Arizona podcast. And the Robert she describes, you wouldn't recognize him. He was quiet, she says, real quiet. But that was the trick of him. He'd sit there saying nothing, then drop a line that put the whole room on the floor. He was a prankster, too. One time he swapped a coworker's hand lotion for cafeteria mayonnaise as a prank. He once swiped a golf cart from hospital security and took it for a joyride down the halls. That one, Ashley says, was all his idea. It's curious, because this doesn't much sound like a monster, right? And he was generous, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't tell a soul. When Ashley got hit by a drunk driver and underwent 25 surgeries out of it, Robert quietly signed over a couple hundred hours of his own paid time off so that her checks would keep coming. He never said a word about it. When another coworker went over the handlebars of a mountain bike and shattered nearly every bone in his face, it was Robert who kept him calm. Robert who set up a blood drive. Robert got people donating their own vacation hours so that the man could heal. That's the Bob Ashley knew. Now the day job. Robert worked the hospitals around Phoenix. He started as a respiratory therapist. Those are people who breathe for you when you can't do it yourself. Then he moved up to cardiovascular tech. That's no small thing. He's the man who runs into a level 1 trauma bay and works on people who are dying right in front of him, threading central lines, placing chest tubes, holding pressure on open wounds. You can't freeze in a room like that. And by every account, Robert didn't. Cool head, steady hands. A coworker said it got almost reflexive. You just do what needs doing while a stranger hangs between living and dying. And when his own 2 kids were born, right there at the same hospital where he worked, people said it was the happiest they ever saw him. A big, proud dad. Ashley used to be a professional photographer, so she shot family portraits of his kids. She framed them, hung them up in the patient rooms at the ICU, just to watch his face light up. He talked about his wife Mary like he won a prize. He married up, he liked to say, got the better end of the deal. He wore his wedding band every single day, so hold on to all that. The jokes, the generosity, the proud dad, because the rest of the story goes somewhere completely different. First up, where'd Bob Fisher come from? He's born April 13th, 1961, Brooklyn, New York. Then in 1976, his parents divorce. He's 15, and it destroys him. It's not a quiet, gentle split. It's screaming matches, very ugly, the kind that leaves a mark. And here's how deep that mark goes. For the rest of his life, Robert refuses to take his own kids to Disneyland, because Disneyland's where his parents had their last big blowout. He won't even drive past the place. Think about that. The man can't hear the word Disneyland without dropping straight back into the worst day of his childhood. After the divorce, Robert and his siblings moved to Tucson to live with their father. He finishes high school, and then he goes looking for structure. He joins the Navy in 1979. He's 18, and he sets his sight on the one thing that'll prove he's the toughest man in any room. He wants to be a Navy SEAL. Well, he tries out, and he doesn't make it. We don't know exactly what happened in selection. What we know is the people who knew him said that he stayed bitter about it the rest of his life. It was a wound that never closed. He leaves the Navy in '82 and pivots to the next toughest thing he can find: firefighting, a small department out in California. And for a minute, things look steady. A career, a purpose. Then he wrecks his back on the job. Bad. It's an injury that changes the way a man walks for good. And from here on out, he moves stiff, chest puffed forward like he's bracing against something, and he starts in on the Percocet for the pain, and not just here and there, daily. The back ends the firefighting, so he moves into the medical field, and that's where he lands at those Phoenix hospitals. He and Mary settle in Scottsdale. They buy a brick house on 74th Place, and they have 2 kids, Brittany and Bobby. Now from the outside, it reads like a comeback: a broken home, military, a setback, a new career, wife, kids, a house, church on Sundays. But there's 2 sides to Robert Fisher, and the outside and the inside are 2 very different individuals. The people closest to him, hunting buddies, co-workers, and at the time his own wife, describe a man who's controlling. He's rigid, and every so often, frightening. At home, Robert runs everything. He tells the kids when to wake up, when to sleep, what to wear, what to eat. Mary's not allowed to paint the walls any color but white. Her mother sews quilts for the family, and Mary keeps them hidden in a closet because Robert won't let her hang them up. He shaves his head down to the skin. His wardrobe fits in a single suitcase, and even his junk drawer squared away perfectly. Every last corner of this guy's life is under total control. And then there's the side that only comes out away from the house. On hunting trips, friends say that they saw something darker, a reckless streak, sometimes a cruel one. He'd fire his pistol up into the air near families on a picnic just to watch them scatter. A hunting partner once watched him smear the blood of a fresh-killed elk across his own face. And more than one buddy said that he'd kill animals he had no use for just to watch them die. He carried a .38 snub nose in a fanny pack everywhere. And his idea of a practical joke: he walked up to a close friend one day, a guy named Ken Hodgson. He raised a loaded 9mm, pointed it right at Ken's head, let him watch the round seat into the chamber, and then he eased the hammer back down and had a grin on his face. He said, "Isn't that cool?" This is the same man coaching Little League. The same man in a pew on Sunday morning. There's another one out at Bartlett Lake. Robert decides he's going to teach his kids to swim by tossing them off the side of the boat. Both of them panic. Brittany's screaming. He lets them flail a while, and then he hauls them back aboard and says, "Now there, how's that?" And underneath all of it, running like a fault line beneath the whole thing, is that divorce. His parents' divorce. The one he never got over. Robert told his friends, told his co-workers, his pastor, that he would never let his own children live through what he lived through. He said his whole life would have been different if his mother hadn't left. He said divorce wasn't an option. And he meant it. Now, remember Ashley, the one who knew the kind, funny, generous Bob? She saw the news break on April 10th, 2001, and her jaw hit the floor. She picked up the phone, called the tip line, and said, "You've got it wrong. There's not a chance." For 10 years, she swore up and down that there's no way on earth he did it. But the years wore on, and here's where she finally landed. On an intellectual level, I have to think he did it. On an emotional level, I don't think that I'll ever get there. So who's Mary Cooper, the woman he married, and what's she up to? She's the one now talking about leaving. And what was it really like inside the house on 74th Street? That comes next. So a little bit about Mary Cooper. Robert met her when they were both just teenagers, a church youth conference down in Tucson, late 70s. They lost touch. Then years later, they found their way back to each other, and in November of 1984, they married in Arizona. Mary was 22, 5'4", blonde hair, blue eyes, a natural-born leader with a wide circle of friends and a sharp streak of sarcasm. Her whole world ran on two things: her faith and her kids, and she was nobody's pushover. When Robert needed pushing back, Mary pushed. At first, it was a honeymoon. Robert was a firefighter, a hero in her eyes and his own. Mary followed him out to a little town in the California desert. And then, a friend told the podcast, the costume came off. Out there, isolated hours from anyone she knew, Robert tightened his grip because control was the whole thing for Robert. It was how he proved to the world that he was a man. He couldn't control the chaos outside of his door, but inside his own house, he was king, and a king makes the rules. So he made them. He was a cheapskate. He wouldn't run the air conditioning in Arizona in the summer, so the curtains stayed drawn all year round. One of Bobby's friends, a kid named Brock, said the place felt like a cave. It was dark, always dark. The only light was coming from the kitchen. He chewed tobacco right there at the dinner table. Mary hated it. She'd shoot him a look. He'd just keep chewing. He wouldn't let Brittany sell Girl Scout cookies, even though Mary was the cookie mom for the whole troop. He said it looked like begging, and some of it was darker. A friend told police that Robert decided how many slices of pizza Mary was allowed to eat, that he'd lock her out of the house and make her walk because he didn't want, in his own words, a fat wife. And the fights? The neighbors heard them, all of them. But here's the strange part. It was always Mary's voice carrying through the walls, never his. Robert had a way of needling her, then going dead silent while she came apart. A lot of those fights were about sex. And I'm going to tread carefully here because Mary's not here to tell it in her own words. But the police file is pretty clear about it. Robert wanted sex every single day. Mary didn't. A friend told detectives that Mary had come to see it as more of a chore on a list. Dishes, laundry, Robert. Truth is, under the Tough Guy Act, Robert was a deeply insecure man. He never felt like he measured up, so he chased the proof of it. Testosterone supplements, hours in the gym, that hard shell, and a wandering eye. A close friend told police that Robert had a problem there. The first whisper of it may have came back in the mid-90s. Ashley, his friend from the hospital, spoke on a podcast about a rumor Robert was carrying on with one of the nurses that they worked with. Now, Ashley's careful here. She doesn't claim to know if it was true. Robert never confirmed it, and the nurse herself outright denied the whole thing. But here's the part that isn't a rumor. For 3 straight years, from 95 to 98, that nurse's husband believed it, and he called the hospital again and again. He left threatening messages for Robert, said, "I'll be waiting for you when you get out." The threat spooked Robert enough that he changed hospital campuses, from one 5-minute drive to his house to one nearly 30 minutes away, just to put some road between himself and that man. And Mary, as far as anybody knows, Mary never found out about that one. But the next one, she found out about that one. 1999, Robert had a sexual encounter with a masseuse at a hotel 5 minutes from his house. It was a one-time thing, but this time, it doesn't stay buried. That August, Robert sits down and writes Mary a letter. A confession. He tells her he's sorry, tells her he'll understand if she wants to separate, and he tells her that he's leaving for 30 days to a cabin up in the woods. And then he adds one more line, that if she decides to leave him, he'll end his own life. Hold on to that one. It matters later. So Robert drives 4 hours north to a cabin on Hawley Lake, and he waits. He waits for Mary to call, to ask him to come home. She doesn't. So this isn't going to plan. Robert's not in control. So he calls her, asks her to drive up to join him. And Mary goes to their pastor's friend, a man named Ken. And Ken, who knew exactly what Robert was, fears for her. He tells her, "Don't go." So Mary stays home. 3 days later, Robert comes back on his own. He apologizes. He buys her a ring. And by every account, the remorse is real. But Robert was a practical man too, and he knew exactly where he was standing, right at the edge of the one thing he swore he would never survive. So he did something nobody saw coming. He threw himself into his faith. Church every week, men's ministry, reading scripture to his kids at night, and for the first time in their whole marriage, Mary watched this stubborn, rigid man try to actually change himself. And not for her, not for the world, for himself. A friend told police there was a period in there where Mary was thankful and honestly a little stunned at the kind of man she saw he could be. And for about a year, the marriage actually worked, but it didn't hold. By October 2000, 6 months out from the murders, a switch flipped and everybody around Robert felt it. The back pain came roaring back. He'd torn up his knee playing football the year before on top of it, and now Robert was staring down the thing that scared him the most: surgery. See, Robert had a neighbor, a friend, a man who was paralyzed. And one day Robert watched him fall right out of his chair, had to haul him back up. He said it was like deadlifting 400 pounds. And that picture got into Robert's head and wouldn't leave. A wheelchair, a body that wouldn't answer, and for a man who needed control the way other men needed air, that was the end of his world. So he started to vanish. He pulled back from church, from his friends, from the gym. By December, he quit working altogether, and the pills took over. Percocet, Percodan, Valium. Friends watched it morph from medicine into something else. And later, some of them would wonder what all of it was doing to his mind in those last few months. Meanwhile, Mary was done waiting. She took a part-time job at a medical supply company. Her boss there, a woman named Lori, became one of her closest friends. And Mary started quietly setting aside money, a security fund, she called it, a little independence of her own. She was building a life outside Robert's reach. And Robert could feel it. He started turning up where he had no business being. At her office unannounced, at her church looking for her. The man suddenly couldn't stop checking in on her because Mary getting free was the one thing in his world Robert couldn't allow. And in those final weeks, she told several of her friends the same thing. She was going to divorce him. And Robert knew it. So here's where we stand. The marriage Robert built his whole identity around was ending. Mary was leaving, and the one thing he swore he'd never survive was happening anyway. What happened over the next 10 days is where the story turns hour by hour, and that's next. 10 days before the end, everything looked fine. Better than fine, actually. Friday, March 30th, Robert and Mary load his quad and ATV into the back of the truck, and the two of them spend the whole day out in the wilderness together, just the two of them. And by Mary's own account, they had a good time. The next day is Saturday the 31st. The family drives 2 hours north to Sedona to a family's wedding. And again, by every account, Robert and Mary get along just fine. A husband and a wife at a wedding 10 days from the end. But somewhere in that final week, obviously something turned. A friend of Mary's named Kim stopped over by the house unannounced. Mary missed Bible study that morning, which she never did. So Kim got worried and drove out to check on her. Mary came to the door and she was different. She was nervous. She didn't ask Kim in. She just stood there blocking the doorway. She said she hurt her hand and Robert wanted her to get it looked at. Kim offered to drive her. Mary said, "No, I'm fine." And that was the last time Kim ever saw her. Now, nobody can say for certain how Mary hurt that hand. And I want to be fair here. In all the years since, not one person who knew this family, not even the ones who hated Robert, ever reported seeing a single mark on Mary or the kids. But Kim drove home that day with a bad feeling that she couldn't shake off. A few days later, Robert turned up at the church, unannounced. He was looking for Mary and the kids, and the people there saw something that they never saw before. Mary was afraid of him. She hurried off to find her children and was rattled that he was even there. Now, for years, Robert liked how much time Mary spent at the church. He always knew that she was there, who she was with. It made her easy to keep tabs on. But now Mary had a job, friends, a whole life he couldn't see into. And a man like Robert, a man who needed to know everything, doesn't take kindly to a wife slipping out of view. Which brings us to Monday, April 9th, 2001, the last full day of the Fisher family lives. And it started like any other Monday in America. Spy Kids was top at the box office, the Twin Towers was still standing. In a quiet Scottsdale cul-de-sac, the Fishers got up and started their day. 7:30 in the morning, Robert clocks in at the Mayo Clinic. He works the cardiac cath lab, assisting on heart procedures. He's threading a catheter the size of a pen into a patient's blood vessels, then holding pressure on the wound till it stops bleeding. If you were on a table in that lab that morning, the calm, capable man leaning over you, holding your life in his hands, police say he would go home and murder his entire family in about 12 hours. Meanwhile, Mary takes the kids to school. 10-year-old Bobby's a gentle goofball, quiet but funny. He loves video games, blanket forts, and tearing around on his Razor scooter. He's a 4th grader at Pima Elementary. A family friend once drove Bobby and her own son down the highway in a convertible. The top was down, the two boys in the back with their arms in the air. She looked in the rearview mirror and thought, that's the innocence of childhood. 12-year-old Brittany is the achiever. Quiet, smart, funny, a little country western in her. She keeps a photo of the family dog Blue taped up inside her school locker. She's got a slight lisp, and her dad won't pay for speech therapy. She sticks up for the kids nobody else sticks up for. And tonight, Brittany's being inducted into the National Junior Honor Society. Her teachers loved her. And here's something, not one of them ever said a word about this to the press. Not until the Missing in Arizona podcast tracked him down 23 years later back to Mary. Around 8, she gets to her part-time job. Her boss and friend Lori remembers her that day. Hair curled, button-up blouse, put together like always. And Robert, jeans, t-shirt, dragging his feet, he just didn't care. Lunchtime, Robert eats outside with 3 coworkers. He's there, but he's not there. He's quiet, he's distant. At one point, he just gets up and walks off. Early afternoon, Mary gets ready to leave work. She's got those Reese's peanut butter cups, the 2-cup kind. She opens it, sets 1 cup on Lori's desk, takes the other for herself, and says, "See you tomorrow." She won't. 3:22 p.m., Mary signs a check at Kmart, $18.18. Back at the hospital, Robert mentions to a doctor that his daughter's getting inducted tonight and he's taking her. And then, 3:51 p.m., Robert checks out. Now that's strange, because if Robert waited just 2 more minutes till 3:53, he gets paid for the full hour. And remember, he's a cheapskate, so this is completely out of character. A coworker said it was the first time she ever saw him leave early. He just walked away from an hour's pay for nothing. He changes out of his scrubs into a cut-off fire department t-shirt, blue jeans, a black Oakland Raiders cap, and shades. And at around 4 o'clock, he climbs into his silver Dodge Ram and he drives off. Now, there's a gap here that nobody's ever filled. Between 4 and 6 p.m., Robert Fisher's whereabouts are unknown. His house is 19 miles south. That's about a half-hour drive, give or take. He's home by 6, but those 2 hours in between, nobody knows where he was. Now, while that's going on, Mary's home, emailing friends about a women's retreat. About 5, she talks to her sister on the phone. Nothing seems wrong. A little later, she talks to her friend. Same thing. Nothing's wrong. 6:54 p.m., the sun goes down on April 9th. And at 7 p.m., Robert and Brittany walk into their middle school. The ceremony's in the cafeteria. The stage on one side, cake and punch on the other. The kids line up on stage. The parents sit on the chairs on the floor. And one of Brittany's teacher walks over to congratulate Robert. She's still afraid all these years later, so we're going to call her Miss Honey. She says, "You must be so proud of her." And Robert just shrugs. He says, "It's to be expected." Another teacher tried the same thing, got the same flat stare, nothing back. She said he didn't seem to be proud of his daughter. He asks how long the whole thing is going to take. 45 minutes, they tell him. And then he pulls his chair away, back from the other parents, and just sits there waiting for it to be over. And Brittany wasn't herself that night. Her teachers all noticed. The smile was there, but something behind it was gone. One of them shook her hand and said it was limp. Wimpy, completely unlike her. The kids who knew her said that she seemed to sense that something was wrong with her dad. Miss Honey felt it too, so she made a decision. She stayed right by that little girl's side the whole night because she looked at Brittany standing there alone with that cold man for a father, and she decided this kid was not going to feel alone. Not tonight. When it was over, the students lit little candles and stepped down off the stage. But Robert was itching to go. He didn't wait for Brittany's diploma. He didn't even get her a cup of punch. He just wanted out. Now here's where Mary and Bobby were during all of this. They were 2 miles away at a hunting safety class at the family's church. So picture it. On the last night of their lives, the family is split in 2. Mary and Bobby learning gun safety at the church, Robert and Brittany at the school. Curious. On the way home, Robert makes one stop. He pulls into an outdoor outfitter, Brittany in tow, and he buys a few things. A water filter, waterproof matches, packets of water purification tablets. He asks the teenage clerk behind the counter how to purify water. Tells him he's going to be drawing it straight from a cattle pond. He's worried about getting sick. And that kid, 18 years old, he's got the distinct feeling that this man was getting ready to be gone for a long, long time. Now hold that thought, we'll circle back, because that clerk is the last person who ever saw Robert Fisher alive. By 9:30 p.m., the hunting class lets out. A family friend named Beth catches Mary on the way out and says, "See you tomorrow morning for Bible group?" Mary says, "Okay." Those are the last words anybody remembers Mary Fisher saying. Beth watches her load the kids into the silver 4Runner and pull off into the dark. Around 9:40 p.m., Mary and Bobby get home. And around 10 p.m., a neighbor out carrying the trash to the curb hears it. A heated argument inside the Fisher house. Robert and Mary. Then around 10:38 p.m., Robert walks out. He drives a little over half a mile to an ATM at the corner of McDowell and 74th, It's 10:43 p.m. A grainy black and white security camera catches him. He's wearing a long sleeve shirt with an RC Cola logo, cargo pants, a Raiders cap, boots, and behind him in the frame is Mary's 4Runner, which is strange all on its own, because Robert and Mary almost never drove each other's cars. Curious. He pulls out $280, that's the daily max. He walks back to the 4Runner, he pauses, he gets in and drives away, and that's it. That's the last confirmed sighting of Robert Fisher on Earth. And it's the last time anyone would see Mary's 4Runner until a camper stumbled onto it 10 days later, 100 miles away in the middle of nowhere. Behind him in that dark house on 74th Place, his family was home for the night. What happened inside those walls in the hours that followed, no living soul will ever fully know. But the evidence tells a story, and it's not the story of a man who snapped. For 23 years, the story went like this. Robert unalives his family. He drives to that ATM at 10:43. He pulls his $280 and he vanishes into the night, which means by the time that house blows up the next morning, roughly 10 hours later, he's got a massive head start on police. Except that's wrong. The Missing in Arizona podcast tracked down 2 witnesses that nobody ever spoke to. In 23 years, the police and the FBI failed to do this. The first is a neighbor. We'll call him Peter. He heads off to work in the early morning hours. At 3:30 in the morning on April 10th, 5 hours after the ATM, Peter drives past the Fisher house and he sees Robert's truck and he sees Mary's 4Runner. Both of them. The second is a man named Bud Wolf, a newspaper carrier. At 5:30 that morning, Bud accidentally tosses a paper onto the Fisher driveway. He sees the truck and he sees the SUV. He even told the police officer about it the next day. It's in the report. So here's what this means. Robert Fisher didn't flee after the ATM. He went back home, and he was still there at 5:30 in the morning, barely 3 hours before the explosion. So he didn't have a 10-hour head start. He spent the night in that house. Let that sink in. At 10 o'clock the night before, a neighbor heard Robert and Mary arguing, so Mary was alive at 10 p.m. I'm good with that. Sometime in the hours after that, inside that house with the curtains drawn, investigators believe that Robert Fisher unalived his family. Mary was shot. The 2 children were found in their beds, in their sleep. There's one small mercy behind all of this. When detectives were finally able to look into those bedrooms, they noticed something. A person who dies in a fire curls inward. The body pulls in from the heat. These didn't. Now there's one small mercy buried in all of this. When detectives were finally able to look inside those bedrooms, they noticed something. A person who dies in a fire curls inward. The body pulls in from the heat. They didn't. The children were lying there peaceful like they were asleep. That told investigators that the 3 were gone long before the flames reached them. A criminal behaviorist who studied the case called the way the children died a very intimate act of violence, something done by a person who knew them. And he believed whoever did it didn't want them to feel any pain. Now, a man who unalives his whole family in a blind rage runs. This man didn't run. He stayed and turned the house into a bomb. He set it off to go hours later, long after he was gone. He soaked the place in accelerant because the fire was never how his family died. The fire was meant to erase how they died. And then a strange detail. The 2 neighbors didn't just see the vehicles, they saw exactly where they were parked. And curiously, during those 2 pre-dawn sightings, the cars kept moving. Truck in the driveway, then out. SUV in the street, then into the driveway. Back and forth. A game of musical cars in the dark, in the dead silent cul-de-sac with a family inside. What about that? Nobody can say. Some suggested it's evidence of a co-conspirator, doubting that one man could have done all this on his own. But one thing is not in dispute. This wasn't the work of a man who snapped. The evidence shows a man being careful. There's a name for what happened in that house. Criminologists call it family annihilation, and they'll tell you it's almost never a sudden thing. It's the end of a long, slow build, years of pressure stacking up, trauma, despair, and then this last trigger that tips it all over. And the man who does it, in the twisted logic in his own mind, often tells himself he isn't destroying his family at all. He's sparing them the shame, the fallout, the one thing he swore his own children would never have to live through. And it happened before. A man in Arkansas killed 16 of his own relatives one Christmas. A father took 4 daughters' lives while they were watching cartoons. Different men, different years, the same unconscionable pattern. And in April 2001, the Fishers became part of it. So at first light, not long after Bud Wolf tossed that last newspaper onto the driveway, the Forerunner pulled out of the cul-de-sac, and then it turned south and straight into the biggest manhunt the state of Arizona had ever seen. So we know the Forerunner turned up in the Tonto National Forest near a tiny community called Young, Arizona. That's around 100 miles northeast of Scottsdale. What we haven't talked about is how it got found. April 20th, 2001, 10 days after the explosion, a camper sees an abandoned SUV near Cherry Creek around 11 in the morning. There's a man and a dog out by it. The camper calls a buddy back in Scottsdale who calls the authorities. The Department of Public Safety helicopter actually finds the Forerunner from the air, but somehow between the chopper confirming the spot and the police actually getting boots on the ground, Robert Fisher had about an hour head start. 1 hour in country like this. Now, I've spent time in the Tonto. It's brutal. We're talking a massive stretch of wilderness, thick brush, ponderosa pine, oak plateaus, limestone caves, old fire roads, deserts that go on for as far as you can possibly imagine. It's sitting up at around 6,200 feet elevation. A Forest Service patrol captain named Tom Lister said, "You've got fairly thick vegetation, a lot of caves, and if a person knows what they're doing, it's very easy to hide." Robert Fisher knew what he was doing. He camped out there. He hiked there. He hunted there for years. This was his country. When police finally reached the Forerunner, it's been wiped clean. There's not a print to be found on it, but there's a pile of human waste outside the passenger door, and the dog Blue won't let anyone near the car. Poor guy's got porcupine quills stuck in his face, and animal control has to be called just to take him in. A healthy dog left behind. It's curious. Hold that thought, tragic as it is, we're gonna circle back to it. Scottsdale PD throws everything it's got at that forest. A full SWAT team, search and rescue, bloodhounds trucked in from the state penitentiary down in Florence. They're turned loose on the driver's seat to lock onto Fisher's scent. And the first place they look is a cave. It's that Forerunner, the way it's parked. It's sitting right on top of a hidden world. There are at least 4 caves within a mile of that spot. And one of them is barely 150 feet from where the SUV was found. That cave's so tight that police couldn't get back into it in 2001, so they called a plumber who snaked a drain camera into the dark. Nothing. They moved to the next one, a cave the locals call the 41 Club. Fresh footprints leading in, multiple passages, tight crawl spaces. About 8 SWAT officers go down into it knowing full well they can be ambushed in the black. They flood every recess with tear gas. Nothing. And remember Ashley, Robert's friend from the hospital? Well, back in the 90s, Ashley and some coworkers went out biking with Robert, and Robert took them down into those very caves. He went in one entrance, and then he came out a different one. So Robert didn't just know these woods, he knew what was under them. A geologist named Frank Kimbler explored these caves back in the 90s and nearly died doing it. And he points out that the tightest cave down there is a vicious crawl that the cavers nicknamed the fallopian tubes. At Fisher's weight, around 190 pounds, he almost certainly couldn't have squeezed through. But the others he could have slipped right in, which leaves the question hanging in the air. Did Robert Fisher crawl into one of those caves and never come out? Or did he go in one side, wait for the search and rescue to roll past, and then walk out the other? And the caves aren't even the only way out there. The Forerunner was found less than a mile from the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Sovereign land. Scottsdale PD has no jurisdiction to go searching it, and you can bet an outdoorsman like Robert knew right where that line was. A Gila County Sheriff's deputy had a whole different theory. He figured Fisher never went towards the reservation at all. He figured he went west into a place called Hell's Gate Wilderness. And Hell's Gate Wilderness is a nightmare. A tangle of canyons so rugged that the Forest Service has barely even mapped it. The indigenous people who lived there in the region 800 years ago took one look at the place and said, "No thanks." Tom Zollner, the Arizona Republic reporter who was first on the scene the morning the house blew, he hiked to Hell's Gate Wilderness himself, hunting for any trace of Fisher. He walked for days through Canyon Creek, through Cherry Creek, and he found nothing. He wrote that you could zigzag across the country every single day for a year and still not cover even 5% of it. That even if you were right over the spot, animals would have scattered the bones long ago. And the pistol? The pistol could be buried under any one of a million rocks. So the search ended the way it started, with 0 confirmed sign of Robert Fisher. Dead or alive. And then, 5 months later, the whole world changed. September 11th, 2001. Every resource, every agent, every spare set of eyes in the country got pulled towards something much bigger, and the trail for Robert Fisher went cold. But the case wasn't dead, because in June 2002, the FBI put Robert Fisher on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, the 475th name in the history of the program, a $100,000 reward on his head. You don't put a dead man on the most wanted list, right? Once Robert Fisher's on that list, his face goes everywhere. America's Most Wanted runs a segment, puts him on their Dirty Dozen. Unsolved Mysteries profiles him, CNN's The Hunt with John Walsh, In Pursuit with John Walsh, People magazine investigates. Over the years, the FBI keeps putting aged progressed photos, 2015, 2016, 2024, each one nudging him older, trying to guess what 25 years in hiding does to a face. And the description goes worldwide. 6 feet tall, brown hair, blue eyes, a stiff, hunch-forward walk from a ruined back, surgical scars to match, heavy tobacco habit, and the one feature that might actually give him away, a gold crown on a tooth in the upper left of his mouth. But here's Robert Fisher's great advantage. He's forgettable. Take away the limp and the tooth, and there's nothing about this man that stands out. Put a hat on him, let him grow a beard, age him 25 years. He's basically any 60-something dude you might walk into anywhere, in any small town in America. Still, the tips keep coming in, hundreds a year. The detective who carries the case now, the third to inherit it, is a man named John Heinzelman, and he works as if Robert Fisher's alive and out there right now. He'll tell you the tips never fully stopped. 1 or 2 a week, every week, going on for 25 years. Said it could be something as simple as, I was looking at Facebook and saw a guy named Bob Fisher. And some of the tips are pretty wild. About a week after America's Most Wanted segment aired, somebody called the tip line from a payphone outside a pizza joint in Chester, Virginia. The caller claimed to be Robert Fisher. He taunted, used vile slurs, and he boasted that they'd never find him. I won't repeat what he said. It's not very nice. Police staked out that payphone for 7 straight days. Nobody who looked anything like Fisher ever came back, so it was almost certainly some sick weirdo, but it rattled everybody who heard it. Then there was Vancouver. Canadian police pick up a 42-year-old man who's a dead ringer for Fisher. And get this, he's even missing a tooth in the very same spot where Robert's got that gold crown. They run the fingerprints, no match. And that right there is the whole infuriating problem. See, back in 2001, DNA science wasn't what it is today. Investigators pulled only a partial profile off the crime scene. It's incomplete. If they ever lay hands on Robert Fisher, they can confirm it in a heartbeat. Fingerprints, dental records, but they can't just run his DNA through a database and wait for it to light up. Though that may be exactly how he gets caught. Because think of it. If Robert Fisher built a new life and he had more children, all it would take is one of those kids spitting into a 23andMe tube, one cousin, one relative on either side, uploading their DNA to a genealogy site, and the net closes. It's how they cracked cold cases far older than this one. Now the man chasing Robert Fisher hardest these days isn't even a cop. It's the podcast host, John Walshak. He hired 3 forensic artists to build fresh, age-progressed renderings of Fisher, and the best one became the brand new wanted poster, the face of the whole show. He teamed up with a Phoenix tip line called Silent Witness for a $10,000 reward, and then he put up a bounty of his own for Fisher's missing .38 revolver, for the keys to Mary's 4Runner, for his old driver's license, his bank cards, and any proof at all that Robert Fisher drew a single breath after April of 2001. He even tracked down the actual 4Runner. Turns out, it went to Mary's sister, and then it got sold off. Last anybody knew, it's still on the road somewhere around Tucson. The truck that carried Robert into those woods is still out there driving around. The man who drove it, still a question mark. So look hard at every man you've ever met who just sort of appeared in your life in April of 2001, because it's happened before. There was a man named John List. Back in 1971, List took the lives of his entire family in New Jersey, and then he vanished. No body was ever turned up. No trace, and for 18 years, everybody assumed he was dead. He wasn't. John List was living across the country under a brand new name with a new wife who had no idea what he'd done. And you know what finally got him? America's Most Wanted ran his story, and a viewer, just an ordinary person sitting at home, recognized his face. With Robert Fisher, That viewer could be you. Now, in November 2021, the FBI made a call. After almost 20 years, they took Robert Fisher off the 10 most wanted list. The official line was that all that publicity just hadn't turned anything up. His slot went to an MS-13 gang leader, but don't mistake that for giving up. Fisher's still on the FBI's wanted list, still wanted for 3 counts of first-degree murder and for arson. He's still armed, he's still considered extremely dangerous, and Detective Heitzelman, he's still at it. He figures Robert could still be holed up in some small town, getting paid under the table, swinging a hammer as a handyman. Or he could be lost somewhere in a big city, just another gray head in the crowd. Or he could be in a cave. So which is it? Is Robert Fisher dead or alive? So here's where we land. 25 years, no body, no bones, no gun, no confirmed sighting, no DNA hit, no dental match, nothing, nada. Just 2 questions hanging in the air. Is Robert Fisher dead or is he alive? Let's clear off the long shots first. Is he living off the land Grizzly Adams style, 25 years deep in the wilderness? No, but people bring up Eric Rudolph, that's the Olympic bomber who hid out in the mountains. But Rudolph lasted 5 years, not 25, and in gentler country, without a wrecked back, and with locals who actually fed him. Nobody slipping groceries to the man who just annihilated his own family. Did he run into those woods and die somewhere at random? A fall? A snake bite? Well, there's a problem with that. Things turn up out there. In 2014, somebody found a Winchester rifle that was leaning against a tree. It was sitting there untouched for 132 years. A local man went missing. His leg bone turned up years later on the very same street that the Fishers lived on. One county deputy found hundreds of bodies over his career. Almost none of them ever stayed missing. And yet 25 years, not a single thing belonging to Robert Fisher has ever surfaced. No bone, no boot, no shell casing. And did he escape, then quietly die somewhere under a fake name? Can't be. His fingerprints are in the national database. His parents' DNA is on file. A John Doe turns up in any morgue in America and it pings. So it comes down to 2. He's dead in those woods by his own hand, or he's alive. Let's take the dead first. About 85% of family annihilators end their own lives. That's the baseline. Most of them don't outlive the act. And Robert threatened exactly that back in 1999. Remember the letter? If Mary left him, he'd end it. But here's what actually happened. Mary called his bluff. She didn't chase him. And 3 or 4 days later, he just came home. He bought her a ring. That threat was never real. It was a leash. One more way to pull her back in. There's the religious piece too. To a lot of people in Robert's church, taking your own life is the one sin you can't come back from. Though clearly his faith didn't stop him from the rest of it. Tom Zollner, the first reporter on the scene, believes Robert's dead. He hiked those canyons for days and found nothing. He figures Robert walked in with that .38 and never walked back out, and the remains are just gone. They're scattered, buried, or lying on tribal land where nobody ever really searched. And there's a simple logic to it. If Robert really wanted to run, Mexico was just 3 hours down the road. He could have just kept driving. So why stop at that one spot in the woods? Maybe because that's where he was meant to die. That's one story. Here's the other. The podcast host, John Walsack, after 2 years on the case, is convinced that Robert Fisher is alive and he's in good company. The first detective on the case, John Kirkham, told the Arizona Republic back in 2006 if he was dead in a cave, we would have found some trace of his body by now. An FBI agent, Bob Caldwell, in 2011 said, he's the kind of guy who wouldn't go kill himself. He's out there hunting, fishing, chewing tobacco with a sore back. A detective named Hugh Lockerbie in 2014 said Fisher's likely still alive somewhere out west. These aren't internet sleuths. These are people who actually work the case. And of the top 30 people Walsack sat down with, friends, co-workers, cops, 20 of them think Robert Fisher's alive. The FBI kept him on that top 10 list for nearly 20 years. You only do that if you think he's out there. But Walsack takes it a step further. He doesn't just think that Robert's alive. He thinks Robert planned it. All of it. The murders and the escape. And the experts back him on the planning. One studied 59 separate cases of family annihilation. All 59 planned in advance. So here's the case. A week or 2 before, Robert tells his mother he's hauled 700 pounds of supplies out into the wilderness. 700 pounds with his bad back. Nobody ever found an ounce of it. Walsack figures there was no stash. It was a story, it was planted so his mother would repeat it to police, and then send them chasing a cache that never existed. Then there's that outdoor store the night before, remember that? Robert made a big show of asking an 18-year-old kid how to purify water out of a cattle pond. This was hours before the murders. If this was already in motion, that wasn't a man with a question. That was a man leaving breadcrumbs. A red herring. And the spot itself, where he ditched the Forerunner, Robert was supposed to go camping right there, that exact spot just a few days later, with friends. Those friends told police to go look there. So the cops swarm that one patch of forest, the caves, the SWAT teams, the reservation line they can't cross, and they do all this while Robert is already long gone. And then there's Blue. Remember the dog? I told you we'd come back to him. First thing, when they found Blue, he wasn't starving, he was healthy. He was hungry, but a dog that had been alone in the wild for 10 days with no food and no water? Not really, which means Blue wasn't out there for 10 days at all. And then there's this. Wildtack brings in a board-certified veterinary behaviorist, Dr. Amy Learn, and he asks her, is there any version of this where Robert walks off into the woods to die and his dog just stays by the truck? No, she walks through it. Even the best trained dogs on earth, told to stay, they'll eventually get up to eat, to drink, and then he goes looking for his person. He tracks him and he stays with the body. Not the truck, the body. There's a case from 2023, a little Jack Russell out in Colorado. He stayed with his owner's remains for 2 months till searchers finally came. But Blue stayed with the Forerunner, which leaves one explanation. Robert didn't die anywhere near that truck. Somebody picked him up. And here's something curious. The cap, the Black Raiders cap that Robert wore at the ATM, it turned up sitting in the seat of the Forerunner. The first cop to reach the vehicle said it wasn't tossed there, it looked to be placed. It was set down careful right up where your shoulder would rest, and it was the only thing of Robert's in the entire car, just the hat. Walczak calls it a 3-part signature. The Forerunner, the dog, the cap. Robert Fisher telling the world, I was here. And think about his body. This is a man whose back was so far gone that 4 years earlier, a buddy had to carry his 25-pound pack for him on a hunting trip. 25 pounds. So I'm supposed to believe that that man dragged every last thing he owned deep into the wilderness to die, left behind nothing but that hat, and not one item was ever found? Not so much. And the Forerunner itself was clean. No mud, no dog prints, even with the windows down through sleet and snow, almost like somebody wiped it. And how does a man vanish? In 2001, before smartphones, before facial recognition, somebody determined could still pull it off. Find a dead child's birth certificate, build a whole new life around it. The door was still open, but there's one piece I've been holding back. The thing that lit the whole fuse. And I want to handle this part with care because it's about Mary, and Mary's not here to speak for herself. In the days right before the murders, Mary Fisher found out that she had syphilis. Now, by every single account, Mary was faithful, which means there's only one possible place it could have come from: Robert. And not from his 1999 affair, from a second one. Since December 2000, Robert was telling everybody he had a stubborn urinary tract infection. He was sicker than anyone had ever seen him, but the podcast ran it down, and it wasn't a UTI, it was a sexually transmitted infection. He cheated again, and this time he gave it to his wife. And when Mary found out, that was it. That was the end. Just days before, she told a friend she couldn't do this anymore, that she was done. She was getting out no matter what it took, and Robert knew it. This time there was no talking his way out of it. No ring, no apology, no Sunday morning church. The proof was on her body. For the man who couldn't survive his own parents' divorce, the man who swore on everything that his children would never live through what he lived through, this was the end of his entire world. And there's another dark thread. That syphilis, it was in Robert too, untreated. And a medical expert told the podcast that syphilis left to spread can climb all the way to the brain. It can twist a man's judgment, his moods, and in the worst cases, push him into delusion. So it's possible, just possible, that the man at the center of all this was coming apart from the inside of his own body. And what does a man like that do when his whole world is coming to an end? He burns it all down. So here we are. Is Robert Fisher a pile of bones in some cave in the Tonto National Forest? Or is he a 65-year-old man sitting in some town where nobody ever knew him before April 2001? Maybe with a wife, maybe with kids who have no idea who he really is? This past April the 10th marked 25 years to the day. After a quarter of a century, you'd think the hardest part would have been the mystery. It isn't. The hardest part is the people who still can't accept it. Mary's father, a man who buried his daughter and both his grandchildren, stood in front of the cameras and called Robert a good man, the greatest dad. Robert's sister, 25 years on, still holds on to a single sliver of hope. She says, "I have to believe there's another answer out there." And the detective carrying this case today called it the destruction of innocence, the monster that lives as your neighbor. And then there's the strangest turn of all. The podcast took a few minutes of his old home movies and built an artificial version of Robert Fisher's voice, so a man we can't even prove is still breathing can at least speak again. So somewhere out there, if he's still alive, Robert Fisher is 65 years old. And this past April, he heard about his own anniversary, same as you just did. Somebody knows where he is. Maybe it's a quiet man at the end of a street in a small town. We don't know. Nobody knows. 25 years and counting, nothing. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.